Welcome to A Philosophy of Action. In the previous episode, we defined the problem. Now I think it's important to lay out the assumptions we make and to construct a basic view of reality. This may seem obvious to many people, but it is necessary to make sure there is no misunderstanding about the foundation of this philosophy, and more specifically, my interpretation of it and its moral basis. Today I want to talk about the perception of reality, the starting point. I think, therefore I am. The only thing we can truly know is cognito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Everything else we experience, our senses, our thoughts, our interactions, could in theory be manipulated. But the fact that you are thinking proves that something exists, a being, an entity, an I experiencing something. That much is undeniable. Beyond that, however, everything else rests on assumptions. So the real question becomes, what assumptions must we make to function in reality? I believe there are three basic ones. There is a reality outside of ourselves. We are not just floating brains and nothingness. That reality is objectively observable through empirical means. We can interact with it, measure it, and understand it to some degree. Nothing is purposefully interfering with our perception of reality. Not demons, no higher beings, no malicious programmer running a simulation. Of course, substances can distort our perception. But I'm talking about deliberate external interference that makes it impossible for us to truly know reality as it is. If these assumptions hold, then reality is both real and actionable. Why the alternatives don't work? Now, why are these assumptions necessary? Because the alternatives are pointless. If you are just a floating brain hallucinating the entire world, okay, maybe that's true, but you can't do anything about it. You still have to live in that hallucinated reality. It's not actionable. Likewise, if some hidden entity were constantly interfering with our perception, you could never know the true nature of that entity or of reality itself, its motives or its limits. Again, there's nothing actionable you can do about it. And if reality were not empirical or observable at all, if nothing could be tested, experienced, or interacted with, then there would be no basis for discussion, no basis for life. It would all collapse into meaningless delusion. So the only practical way forward is to assume there is a reality, we can observe it, and no one is deliberately corrupting that observation. The emergence of life, no higher entity. The emergence of life. From there we look back in time. How reality itself came into existence. Whether through the Big Bang, divine intervention, or some other cause. It is not particularly useful for our philosophy of action. What matters is what came after, Earth, the solar system, and life itself. Archaeological and biological evidence suggests that life began from a primordial soup of complex molecules. Over time, through countless random processes, some molecules became capable of replication. First RNA, then cells, then bacteria, then more complex organisms. Of course, the primordial soup theory is still a theory. There's alternate explanations. However, most of them boil down to at some point bacteria came into existence through some natural conditions. Most early forms of life failed to replicate and disappeared, or at least can be assumed to come into existence and then die. And because they didn't mutate, they didn't have the fundamental desire to replicate or the ability to replicate, they just stopped existing. So billions of different unique configurations of DNA probably came into existence and cease to exist. The only ones we know now are the ones that succeeded, our ancestors. When it comes to animals, something similar occurs, whereby certain animals can live and reproduce in certain environments and others don't. Either because they can't reproduce, in which case they stop existing as well and do not show up into our historical record, and others do reproduce. And if there's enough of them, eventually some of them will be fossilized and we will learn about them. The first principle of life. From this we can extract a fundamental principle of life. What replicates continues. What does not disappears. Life that survives is life that can replicate. Life that cannot vanishes. Therefore, the first two principles of life are to survive. You can't replicate, because if you don't survive, you can't replicate. And to replicate, to have descendants, to pass on life. Even today, across every species, whether bacteria, whales, elephants, or humans, we see these same principles at work. Every living thing seeks at some level to survive and to replicate. Anything that does not is not viable, not sustainable, and eventually ceases to exist. The drive to thrive. But there's a third principle to thrive. Living beings do not merely survive and replicate. They also seek to thrive, to expand, to improve, to gain resources, to become stronger or more capable in their environment. Organisms that do not strive to thrive are eventually outcompeted by those that do. A species that fails to adapt, grow, or improve will eventually be replaced by one that does. Thus the third principle is simple: to thrive, to grow, improve, and become better at survival and replication, and just better in general. The three core principles, therefore, to any philosophy of action and to any philosophy of life have to be to have descendants, to survive, and to thrive. There is a hierarchy to these. Descendants come first because they carry survival into the future. Survival comes second because you must live in order to have descendants. Thriving comes third because it strengthens survival and have the ability to have descendants, but must always serve the two higher values, or at least should not violate them. Thriving is valuable, but only insofar as it supports survival and reproduction, at least in the basic calculus of life. Reality and morality. This brings us to morality. Reality outside ourselves exists. Life within it and all life forms follow the principle of survival, reproduction, and thriving. Therefore, anything that supports these principles is aligned with life and with nature itself. Anything that actively undermines them is anti-life and anti-nature. This is why philosophies like antinatalism, which reject reproduction and the continuation of civilization in the human species, are fundamentally opposed to nature. If nature is good, then such philosophies are, by definition, evil. Why nature is good? But why is nature itself good? Or why can we call it good, rather? Because good is what we strive for. The highest value in everything that exists must, by necessity, follow the principles of life, survival, having descendants, and thriving. These principles are not arbitrary. They are conditions for being itself. They are objective and observable in all things that live and have lived. Religious traditions often say God is good because God is God. My claim is similar, but with nature, not God. Nature is good because nature exists. Reality is good because it exists. And life is good because it exists. And more specifically, your life is good because you exist. It is worth protecting, it is worth fulfilling, and it is worth living according to the principles laid out by nature itself. There is no need to be scared to find a justification for your life. It in and of itself is good. And it in and of itself is something you can be proud of and seek to expand and thrive within. To summarize, reality exists and it is observable. Life exists within that reality. Life is defined by three core principles: to have descendants, to survive, and to thrive. These principles form the foundation of morality because they are the foundation of existence itself. And any philosophy that rejects these three principles rejects life and reality itself. A philosophy of action must therefore begin here, with life, survival, reproduction, and thriving as the bedrock of everything else.